Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And I will introduce our guest who really doesn't need any introduction, but we will do this anyway. And again, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Rosa Clemente is an award-winning organizer, speaker, political commentator, producer, independent journalist, scholar activist, and former vice presidential candidate. The Bronx-born Black Puerto Rican is frequently sought out for her insight and commentary on Afro-Latinx identity, Black and Latinx liberation movements, police violence, colonialism in Puerto Rico, hip hop feminism, third party third party politics, and more. In 2008, Clemente made history when she became the first Afro-Latina to run for vice president of the United States on the Green Party ticket. She and her running mate, Cynthia McKinney, are to this date the only women of color ticket in U.S. presidential history. Since then, Clemente has continued to be a powerhouse. She is the creator of Know Thyself Productions, under which she has organized multiple national tours, one being Puerto Rico on the Map, an independent and unapologetic Afro-Latinx centered media collective founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, and the other, the Black Diasporic Organizing Project, a nonprofit dedicated to combating anti-Blackness within the wider Latinx community. Recently, she was the associate producer on the 2021 Oscar-winning biographical drama film Judas and the Black Messiah. She is currently completing her PhD at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center at the University of Massachusetts Elmhurst. Please help us welcome the former vice presidential candidate of the United States, the incredible, the one and only Rosa Clemente. Rosa,
Oh my God.
thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for asking me to be part. I love libraries. Libraries kept me sane through my entire middle school and senior high school experience. So thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, so glad, so glad. I have to start because I remember when you and former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney
Yeah.
ran for office in this country. And it was, and it still is, it was just such an amazing time to see two formidable women of color running and running on the platforms that you guys were. You were dealing with reparations, you were dealing with the abolishment of the death penalty, statehood for DC. I mean, you got the in the war on poverty, in the war, not on poverty, in the war on drugs, excuse me. You were for that. I mean, it was just amazing. And to know two women who were not only running on that platform, but who had been doing work for decades in those areas, not just talking, but actually walking the walk. And so the one thing that I really want to ask you about that is that run was historic, no doubt. How do you think your candidacy has served to elevate the status and recognition
Hmm.
of Afro-Latino identity within the US?
What an incredible question. Nobody has asked me that before. I mean, the reality is that when I began to identify as a person of African descent, a Black Puerto Rican, it was to this day my political home, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, that welcomed me into that space. Um, and once I was in that space, it just built, kept building and building, and it's interesting because I also tell people, like, once I became the candidate, a lot of many women and men at that term. A lot of people, talking about non-binary and LGBTQI. I was definitely that person. I was like, wait a minute, like, you know, LGBTQI, resources. Why is somebody calling me right now? That's my homie. So to me, I really didn't understand who I was, even though I grew up in the Bronx and 21 miles away from Westchester County. I came to life in the Bronx, the congressional district to this day, to the second richest suburb, Westchester County in New York State. So until I went to college, I didn't even know why I, as a Boricua, Puerto Riqueña, was put in a colonial space. I didn't know anything. So when I went to college and began to understand all of this and would come home to my family, I'm like, why didn't you teach me this? What happened? Because they didn't know.
Mhm.
And my parents come from a generation like other Afro Black Latinx folks that came to America, and had to work in warehouses. So once I began to learn about who I am and my people and bringing that back to my family, particularly my father was just invested because my father is phenotypically Black and my mommy is phenotypically white, but she's a Boricua, right? Born on the island. Yeah, so to me, like, it's just been an incredible experience, but also the acceptance of particularly African American and African descendant groups in this country that embrace me more than other, quote, Latinx people embrace me. So I'm not the person where Latino, Latin, and Latinx, whatever these terms are, that which we created against, like nobody asked us, is a space where I am often told I don't belong. So particularly in African descendant spaces and African American spaces is where my home began.
Wow. Wow, that's really interesting. And I really want to follow up on that question because earlier, before we started, we were talking about your essay, Who is Black?
Oh,
And I just wanted to read just a small excerpt from that. Um, what you started out, I just love it. You go, yesterday, an interesting thing happened to me. I was told I am not Black. The
mhm.
kicker for me was when my friend stated that the island of Puerto Rico was not a part of the African diaspora. I found out that many Black Americans and Latinos agree with him. The miseducation of the Negro is still in effect. And so listening to you talk about how you had to bring that information back home to your family that look, yeah, Puerto Rico is part of the African diaspora, as is, the Caribbean and what we call South America. So do you want to unpack like some of the history around that for us?
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to talking about particularly Puerto Rican people in the diaspora or in Puerto Rico, the land itself, you know, we are not taught about ethnicity, race at all. And if I had not gone to college, I wouldn't have put it up together. But I also I also believe the divide in our community is purposeful. Like I do believe that there are systems in place that are like, don't talk to Jamaicans as Puerto Ricans, don't talk to Haitians as Dominican people in the, Dominican Republic. But personally for me, I have found a home in Black studies, Africana studies, Pan-African studies. Latino, Latina, Latinx, that is what it looks like. They don't want me, you know? And I had to come to a choice a couple of years ago to say, well, if y'all don't want me, I'll go someone else that wants me, because my political education not only comes from my experience at SUNY Albany, the State University of New York in Albany. Obviously, y'all being in Rochester, you get it. Like, y'all know the SUNY system. I mean, it's Rochester. We know about Frederick Douglass, Auburn, Harriet Tubman. Like, I grew up in New York, and until I went to college, I didn't know where Harriet Tubman, who she was, how she was raised. I didn't know about Frederick Douglass and that he did his most impactful work in Rochester. So I had to kind of, regroup and say, well, like, if they don't want me, I know other people want me, particularly as it relates to African American, Puerto Rican uh, politics, culture, and all of that, because Puerto Ricans, as people that are colonial part of the understanding, they don't also, so many people don't understand that, like, as Puerto Ricans and African Americans, we have a really dope connection, and part of it is like hip hop, right? We come together in hip hop as the Bronx is burning. We come into it as hip hop and African descendants, African folks, Latino descendants, fighting to make sure that we can ensure that the SUNY system of New York State would be important to us, and what that looks like.
So, okay, if I'm kind of understanding correctly, what was happening with you was that there was some identity issue going
Yeah,
on, that when you around some Latino people, they didn't necessarily view you as Latino as per se. So what was the Latino identity according to them?
right.
What were they saying?
That's a great question. So when I got into the State University of Albany, New York, and I started going like meetings with organizations, groups, associations, when I went to Fuerza Latina, which is one of the biggest Latino organizations within the SUNY college system, I went to a meeting and I sat in the meeting, and then the whole meeting was in Spanish. So after the meeting happened, I said, listen, like, not all of us speak Spanish. I do, right? Because I'm under a system that made me understand who I was. But also, like, yo, you can't just like kick somebody out because they don't understand, or they don't understand Spanish. So for me, that was a very important moment in my life, where then I was also like, look, the Black Student Alliance is accepting me more than the quote Latino study, Latino study experience. And I was like, I want to be where I'm accepted,
Mhm.
you know. And again, I think it's important for folks to understand that particularly the Puerto Rican experience is very different than the rest of the Latinx Hispanic experience. That being that as Puerto Ricans, when we were colonized by the United States government, and we are still a colony, is that folks were fighting back, and it didn't have to do about can you speak Spanish or not. And I was telling these brothers and sisters at that time, like, come on. So you're saying the metric is to say you speak Spanish? Well, I speak Spanish. What does that mean for my politics? Does it mean that I'm about Black freedom? Does it mean I check feminism, sexism, misogyny, right? Like, it was not disconnected. But a couple weeks after that, I did go to a meeting with the Albany State University Black Alliance, and I found my home. And after the first year, I became president of the organization. And a lot of things that happened when I was elected they were meetings in the newsletter, where they're like, yo, if you stand with Rosa Clemente, you're against Latinos. I mean, I had administrators call me in and like, you need to pick a side. I was like, pick a side? This is crazy. This is 1990. So we also on the back of hip hop as one of their most political spaces in the public academy. And I was like, well, yo, that's not me. And I joined my political home, which was a Suba. And then after that, my political home to this day, the Malcolm X grassroots movement. So at SUNY Albany, I did learn how to become an organizer. I did learn how you go down and you post the flyers and you go to the poetry reading and you're like, hey, we're going to have a meeting next week. Hey, Nation of Islam, come see us. Hey, Million March, we're going to go there too. Hey, Dr. Martha Moreno Vega is here. We're going to speak to that. And once I kind of got that affirmation, I was like, this is my life for the rest of my life. Even if my family does not agree.
Okay, you want to talk about that a little more because because it seems like what you're saying is that there's this tension between a political Latino identity and then a cultural Latino identity. So can you unpack that for us a bit?
Absolutely. So once I began to know who I was and part of our, like who we were in our community, I really never turned back. I'm just going to focus on this. I'm going to focus at as how I am a Boricua, a Puerto Rican that has family to this day in the Bronx, including my dad that owns a business in, the Bronx. And I just felt more at home. I didn't feel like people were hating on me. I didn't want to go to any meetings with administrators like telling me I wasn't Black. And I was not willing to put our people in terms as it means a colonizer's language. So we're talking about the early 1990s and we're talking about 30 years. Until this day, I have an incredible community with my folks at SUNY Albany, but it really prepared me to be able to also discourse and what it looks like to understand the plight of us as people, African descendant, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. And once I really began to connect myself to the greater world, right? The United States is this and the rest of the world is this. But the United States gets all the coverage and all the systems. But also, y'all are from Oakland, so it's like Black Panther Party, period. But I didn't know about the Panther Party till I went to college. I didn't know about the Young Lords. I didn't know that Chacha Jimenez was with Fred Hampton Jr. 7 hours before Fred Hampton Jr. was assassinated by the FBI and the police in Chicago. So for me, I have been able in the best of ways to kind of keep that going. And people who know me well will also understand that whatever it means for freedom to look like us, we need to be together because the system is going to continually try to divide us over things as skin color, phenotype. And it's interesting because the last couple of years around Afro-Black Latinx identity, I have gotten a lot of responses from particularly Latinx people, maybe some African-American people, they're like, yo, girl, you're mad light. I was like, aren't we all mad light if we were colonized? When people bring that up to me, I'll be like, I am not a Black Puerto Rican, but this person next to me is lighter skinned and he can point out his heritage or her heritage. And I was like, yo, this is what it is, because I understand also the system of enslavement and how not millions, 60 to 75 million people were kidnapped from the continent of Africa. And I think what it is that in that work, right, what it comes down to is that people don't know that we, particularly as Puerto Ricans, fought against colonization. They don't know that. but also it serves the system of white supremacy to say, let's keep all these Black and brown people divided. But it's also geographic, and that's important. What I know here on the East Coast is not it's different from the West Coast. The relationships are different. And what does that look like? For me, what I always tell people is like, you want to work for Black freedom, let's get down. If not, be out. Whether it's a Boricua, Dominican, African American person. So for me, I've been so lucky to be mentored by some of the greatest in Black studies, because Latinx studies hates me to this day. They don't want me around. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go to my people, and where my people are at, but also like where a younger generation is at.
So you're seeing more of an openness with the younger generation than, say, your generation out in terms of people being willing to get together and, struggle together, fight together for freedoms, yeah, and
Yeah,
liberation.
but you know what it is with that is I don't think that many whole Latinx people get it, right? Because the media and all of that, wants to divide us. But as a Puerto Rican, I'm like, my entire experience has been forming relationships with other Black people, particularly Jamaicans. So coming out of the Bronx, right, like the home of hip hop, you're talking about a culture that was created with African Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Jamaicans. And and even the academia around this scholarship completely erases that. But also that's why hip hop was created, where you had a group of young people who were being burnt out of their houses. At one point, New York City was declared bankrupt. The president was like, we're not going to put you out.
Mhm.
But that hip hop is what sought to bring that together. And it did. Like, I don't have a doubt that it did. What I have a doubt with is where we're at right now when we're talking about 50 years of hip hop. Like, how would you have a culture that's a multi-billion culture and our people are in worse material conditions ever? Right? So that's why I always keep my lens at. Like, as dope as hip hop may be, there's still too many women, but also there's too much misogyny and transphobic behavior. And now I'm not trying to be there. And I have not been there, although I love hip hop.
Yeah, I know you've done a lot of work in the hip hop community. One thing that you mentioned, right, is the tension between blacks that's created, right? This is
Yeah.
manufactured a lot of times between blacks and Latinos, and a lot of that does come from the slave trade. Some people, if they're lighter, they want to identify as white, and if they're darker, they want to identify as black, and maybe not, in some cases, and then that definitely causes tension among other groups. Having said that, what we're looking at now, right, like with um, the results of the 2020 census, right, is that we're looking now at Latinos as the second largest group in the US after white people. So as this population continues to grow, right, what are going to be the political implications for Afro Latinos?
I mean, I think it's not just political education amongst Afro Latinx. I think that we all need to be super mindful of the white nationalism, white supremacy that's coming out in a way that we never expected. So for me, I definitely am at a point. It's like, if we don't all get it together, like, what's the point? Like, Trump is coming, the Proud Boys are coming, these mass shootings are coming for a reason, to erase us as Black and brown people. And what does that mean in our communities? Well, it means completely colonialism, trapped, and I try to like at least be that voice where it's like we need to listen more about what's happening with us as opposed to embracing what divides us. And part of that is also, look, whatever country we may come from, not only as Latinx people, but people all over the world, right? So 82 states in Africa, the Caribbean, the Caribbean political moment. It's like we've already been here, but now that we have social media, what does that look like? And I also believe that there's a lot of young people that are not only aware of this situation, but also very angry at my generation. They're very angry that we didn't solve the climate catastrophe. They're very angry, like, how are you going to send this to school when you talk about the prison industrial complex? How are you going to send this to school when it's cops in our school? So for me, particularly the experience of my daughter, but everyone around her is like, yo, we just got to keep fighting back because they want us to lay down, and the Democratic Party is not going to save us. I mean, they've already been very clear that they don't love us and they don't want to save us. We got to save ourselves. But, I super think it's also instructive to like anybody in Oakland, where we have so many organizations where like, what does self-determination look like? How do we build our own institutions? I think that's a stronger thing in the West Coast. In the East Coast, we're always begging to be included. In the West Coast, we can find spaces where we're included. But I do believe that young folks are also having a really. So I also think that like the younger generation right now is not necessarily around race, ethnicity, but definitely around gender, sexuality, and the system of police violence is affecting them. And obviously, mass shootings, right? Like after this mass shooting that just happened in Nashville, the biggest threat to young under 18 people in the United States, every boundary, ethnicity, is violence in school shootings. When I was growing up, that violence was not, like that. But now you have an entire generation that is like, what's the point? You send us to school, we do the drills, and we still getting killed. What's the point? You talk about like, ways to deal with climate catastrophe, but what are y'all really doing? So I try to stay like super close to like young folks that are doing great work, but also understand that there's a history that as Black and Brown people, we are not just our oppression. There's been thousands of years of our work, and that are, specifically begin to deal with it is that not, or most, quote, Latinx people do have a history of colonization. So if you're not able to decolonize the land, you can't decolonize the mind. But also, if you've colonized the land, you still have to work through decolonization of the mind. And that's what a lot of my work is about. Like, what does visibility mean if we have no power? What does that mean? And I get it. I've been at award show, I've been on all this, I've been on red carpets, like, but that has nothing to do with changing the expectations of material resources in our community. So for me, what I try to do is if I'm stepping to a space that's visible, I'm always bringing with me working class and poor folks, because that's how I was raised,
Oh yeah, thank you so much for that response. So we are going to open it up for
Oh,
questions.
is it?
Yeah, it went fast. We're going to open it up for questions. Does anybody have a question? for Rosa Clemente. Okay, there's Fred Rosenbaum Fred Rosenblum, sorry about that, has a question.
Say that again. No.
Hi.
Hi. So jumping back to about the start, so we have our local Congresswoman, Barbara Lee, running for president. How does that look to you? What impact will it have? Or is it just going to be nothing? I mean, I'm not talking about winning, but the impact of her, the leading Congresswoman in, running for president.
Well, thank you for that. I'm on what you just said first. I don't think any of the systems at this point are working for any of us, and so I'm super grateful for you to ask that, because, you can be a space as an organizer and activist, and you want to recruit people, but also you have to be real with what's going on in the country. And I mean, come on, like these last couple years, not only climate catastrophe, but we're seeing the attacks around critical race theory that don't even, it's just insane. Like they don't even critical race theory to graduate school, because I'm also completing my dissertation and took class in the grad school around, critical race theory. I think a lot of times people may want me to say it's all good, and I'm like, yeah, it's not really. I mean, but for me, it's also been super instructive with like organizations like Cooperation Jackson and what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi, to create a community that's not dependent on the state. And then we also see so many farms, and I live 35 minutes away from, I think, one of the greatest farms, Soul Fire Farm, and what they've done there to bring Black and brown, white, not underprivileged, but also people that are working towards this. So I always stay hopeful, but I also am trying to be, truthful. And I really believe that, I mean, we're at that space right now where the 99% are being dictated to by the 1%. And I think what is missing in a lot of particularly African American and other Black Latinx spaces is it's not an integration of whiteness, but also not a realizing, like, it's not just us. Like, they will snatch people who are white who believe in the politic of Black freedom. And I don't know if people are there right now. And I think sometimes when I do interviews, they're like, it's all pessimism. And I'm like, I don't live my life on pessimistic, but I'm realistic. Thank you for that.
Any other questions?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, my name is Gabriel Ship. I'm a resident of Richmond, California. It's about 15 minutes from Oakland, and it's more of a statement than a question. I just like to say thank you to Rosa for coming on, and I was just recently exposed to her through her. I guess she was on a recent panel with Jared Ball, who's part of who's part of Black Power Media. So that's kind of how I was introduced to you. And so that was a powerful panel discussion that you were on with him. So I just would like to encourage people to go listen to that.
Yes.
And also, hopefully, you can go on Black Power Media more often, because that's a great show. So I just want to say thank you, and appreciate you taking your time to come on to the Oakland Public Library and share with us.
Thank you, Gabriel. I appreciate that. So Gabriel's talking about a conversation I had with Dr. Jared Ball on Black Power Media. You could Google it on YouTube, where me and Jared Ball are comrades, but specifically talking about hip hop in the 50th year and all the violence and abuse that many of us faced when we were deep in the culture of hip hop. But I also think the conversation is super instructive about making sure that we also understand that if we do not understand the plight of of working class people, like we don't know what's going on. So it's also kind of weird because here you have, especially my generation, who like we grew up in houses that, or spaces that were quite poor, but also like, how do we just give everybody a pass? And he's speaking to what so many women in hip hop have faced and had to kind of like be out of that space to feel safe. With all that being said, I also love the cult. I love hip hop, and I try to be in the space, but I'm also older, so I'm trying to find like younger folks who want to take that on. But the conversation was really good as well because me and Dr. Ball are like phenotypically super light skinned, and a lot of our critiques will be like, y'all ain't Black enough. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean that somebody who's African American and Latino can say, we are repping the race, ethnicity, and all of that, but we're not going to let people like me or Jared Ball in conversations because we're too light? I'm like, come on, y'all. Is this where we're at right now? I mean, this is the entire American project right here. It's like Africans being enslaved, migrants being, around labor, Latinos, quote, Mexicanos that actually had California and Texas as part of, who they are. I think it's hard. And then we're in a time right now because anything we talk about is considered a threat to the United States government. And I am hoping that in these type of discussions, we can take it to another level. Like, yo, dude, they're coming after all of us. They're not going to care if you're from Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Belize, Puerto Rico, Charlotte, New York City, Oakland. Like, they're coming after all of us. And in the last couple of weeks, we've seen states particularly ban teaching about Black history, not just Latinx history, but Black history. And in fact, before I came on this call, I was listening to this new report where it's like, we want to take Ruby Bridges out of teaching Black history. And I'm like, Ruby Bridges, the 10-year-old girl that was, sent to integrate a school with armed state troopers. And I think it's hard for people to understand that, like, even reproductive rights is not just about abortion. You're right. Like, reproductive rights is not just about who can have an abortion. It's about who is allowed to make children. What does it look like if one day certain men are not viewed in the work? Like, what does that mean? And it could very well be that all the work we're doing is being criminalized. That's what it is. The work that we're doing is now criminalized. So what does that mean? It means that folks like me ain't gonna go no speaking gigs, but that's not the biggest thing. To me, is how the state and the armed forces and the military in the state will stop us from even talking. And as someone who loves, and I've read thousands of books, I love everything I learned in the library. I'm like, yo, this is really some 1984 George Orwell. Like, we're here. It's not hidden. That's the other thing, that white supremacy right now is not hiding. When we were growing up, they didn't have like, nobody knew where they are. Now we're faced with a moment where it's like, they see this as a potential, not only money maker, but sorry, not only as a maker, but also they're able to shut us down, whether it's in academia, spaces of work, groups in the community, youth groups. And I think we just have to be more aware of what's happening so that we don't go into spaces where we're not, talking about like, hey, we got to talk about freedom. What does freedom look like? Ending capitalism, like supremacy, patriarchy, transphobia. Because I do know that so many people that I organize with, like, it's like Black Matter says, until Black people are free, we're not free. So for me, I kind of always stick to that. If I want to do events that elevate us, but if we're not talking about Black freedom, then we're not doing anything. So it also comes, and for me, it understands that particularly Latinx people in the United States are told that as long as they try to fight for whiteness, they're good. But if they want to fight for Blackness, they're a problem.
Mm. Rosa, there's a question for you in the chat from
Yeah, let's do it.
Rafe. It says, thank you for participating in this event, Ms. Clemente. My questions are, so we're going to start with the first one. Based on how you described feeling as a youth, the youth feeling about our inability to solve certain issues, do you think we should be organizing differently than in previous eras?
Well, look, what I say is that, for me, I do study after 1968 because I think there's a big gap. And Dr. Barbara Ransby talks about this. She calls it the lost years, where from 68 to 1974, you're talking about the assassination of Fred Hampton, the rise of Black Power, Black Panthers, the rise of the American Indian movement, the Weather Underground, the young lords, and so many of them are still alive, and I think all that history is hidden for a certain purpose, which is to make us weak, make us hate each other. And in fact, I was reading something the other day where it says the colonizer wins when it takes your mind. So as we also strive to make sure that lands are decolonized, we have to also strive to decolonize minds. And I think a lot of people have a problem with it, and we're living in a social media world where it's like whoever comes on has visibility, but visibility is not power and it doesn't relate. So unless we're helping to support organizations and people who do this work, what does it mean? The flip side is I'm still an optimist and I love young people. And I think it is young people, but also when we speak to politics in our community, I think we also have to be very, honest and say that there's a lot of brothers and sisters who will never be in higher education. It does not mean that they don't have the answers, because often the answers to these problems are people who grew up in these systems, and they who are the most marginalized make the greatest contribution to freedom. So look, at the end of the day, I can be at some award show and 2 days later be on the block with brothers and sisters. I could be at an event and then be at the block with brothers and sisters who are like, you're not listening to us. We don't have apartments, we don't have healthcare, the police are brutalizing us, they're killing us. So for me, anytime I'm in like this super, whatever visibility looks like, it's about making sure that I let people know that also I learned this from the block. I learned this from the streets. I learned this when I was my husband. I learned this living in Flatbush in the South Bronx, about how if you just have a conversation with people on the block, they're going to respond with the solution. It's not like our brothers and sisters and non-binary folks want to like be in a quote illicit underground economy. It's that they don't have anything that helps them in that. So the underground economy is the economy that so many people buy into just to survive. I think that's what's being lost. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, what's being lost is the intersection of what it means to be a socialist and not fight capitalism.
You know, I really love that question. Thank you so much, because that has been a thing, right? That people have been talking about. It's like, well, is the peaceful protest still impactful? And then we looked at what happened with Occupy Wall Street, right? That was a little bit, that was different, right? In a sense. And we look at, yeah, that is a good question. Should we be looking at more types of protest and resistance that
Not
looks more
that
like
type.
Occupy?
Not that type. I mean, like
Okay.
the history right now, I mean, what's happening right now is we're able as historians to begin to understand, right? Like Occupy, Ferguson, Charlotte, like Black Lives Matter, trade, all of this. But the system adjusts. And I know that's what's happening. So the system of capitalism, white patriarchy will adjust and absorbs the movements. So what happens after George Floyd is very instructive. George Floyd is murdered during a pandemic. People come out. That's important. But by the time those people come out, not only is that whole movement already infiltrated, there's also mad internal conflict. So if you would talk to the Ferguson brother, sister, non-binary folks right now, they would tell you this whole movement has effed them over, which is completely right. You have academics, people with high visibility. They're like, oh, I was in Ferguson for a day. Someone like me, been in Ferguson for years, uplifting the story of the people that, rebelled in Ferguson, not for a day, not 2, not 3 months, but for over a year. And I do know that so many people, young folks, feel abandoned. They feel they've been used. They can talk to you about the number of interviews that they did where people, famous people, have had book deals, and for me, what I always infuse is this. Unless I know the people on the block, I don't have anything to say. If I don't know the people on the block, my role as an independent journalist is to have them. And I'm super disappointed and I'm sad. Like, I'm sad as we see what's going on with Black Lives Matter. I'm sad to see what's happening in Ferguson. I'm sad to see so many younger African-American, Latinx, Palestinian folks, Mexicano folks that put literally their bodies on the line and have been marginalized. So every time I see like some progressive media, some Black media, I'm like, you're not listening to the people of these communities. If you're not doing that, then you don't need to be a part of this. And it's hard. And there's a lot of pain in there. It's a lot of pain when you see something that could have been a shift co-opted. It's hard, painful.
Rafe, when we just got disconnected and came back, it threw out your second question. Would you like to ask Rosa that question now?
Yeah, I can ask it. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating to listen to
Thank
the
you.
discussion.
Appreciate that.
My second question is, we've talked a little bit about hip hop, and I would like to know if you feel like there are other music communities that maybe center more of what you're looking for.
Rap, did you say other music?
Yeah, other music communities besides hip hop.
Well, no, I don't. I am sure that hip hop and the culture of hip hop is one of the most incredible cultural activists organizing spaces, right? So even though it still leaves out a lot of women, right? So like you can have a dead prez, but you also have to move fresh. You can love Talib Kweli and also have Jean Grey. You can talk about DJs and have a cotton candy. You could talk about hip hop feminism and cite Joan Morgan, who gave us that term. But I think the ultimate thing around hip hop music and the industry is that it's already co-opted, is like deaded, right? In this way, I've been doing a lot of work around the Universal Hip Hop Museum in terms of fighting against their executive director and other people on the board that are known to support particularly a couple predators, African Bambaataa and Russell Simmons. But our stories don't make that news, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then after a while, a lot of us as women also had to like be like, I can't be in these spaces that are super misogynistic, you know, like I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to teach these quote brothers about what they're doing wrong, you know. So in this 50th year of celebrating hip hop, which I want to celebrate hip hop for sure, and I will, but I'm also going to critique the culture, you know, and that's what makes someone like me or so many other sisters, like they don't want us in these spaces, and it's all good, right? Like, you know, as I said before, young people will always create something new. I think with hip hop as a billion dollar industry, people don't know how to even have the conversation. What's the question? But what's the goal? Are we trying to be free, or are we just gonna have like Pepsi commercials? Like I don't know. You know. What I do know is that this work has been done for decades. And if we look into the history, we'll know so many names of people that have never gotten any shine, but also the purposeful erasure of particularly African American and Latino women in the culture.
I think we have time for a quick question. I think that was TB, the person that's
Oh,
TB
yeah.
iPhone. I think I saw your hand up a while ago. Do you still have that question, or was it answered already? Oh, no, it was a clap. Okay. Is there anybody with a quick question? Yeah, a lot of claps here today. Is there anybody with one more quick question for Rosa Clemente? TB iPhone said, thanks for being here, Rosa.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we love you. You're getting hearts and
I got the red, black,
everything.
and green. That's a red, black, and green right there.
Yes, indeed. You got that red, black, and green there. Yes, amazing, amazing. Yes, thank you so much. People are just listen, give us your last thoughts, Rosa. What are your last thoughts you want us to walk away with here?
I want us to be free. It's a really hard time to say that in these times, particularly in the United States. But, you know, what I definitely look at as a historian is not only Black studies in the academy, Black studies where I am home. I'm the person that no Latino studies want me, but Black studies embrace me. But I also, you know, understand what is happening in our communities in terms of capitalism. And I have to be better at that. If I look at any of my work, I'm like, my weakness would be understanding capitalism and the intersections of all of it. Because once my mom and dad chose us to move someone else, I had experiences that none of my cousins did. right? So I would go and visit my cousins every weekend, and they were like, "You're gonna go to the park," but I'm not. And I would be like, "Why?" And they're like, "Because all our counselors tell us Puerto Rican women only get, you know, pregnant and they live on welfare." So,
Mm.
when I started to get these messages, and then when I went to college, I was like, I understand it. I think we're in very hard times in this sense. It's not that we don't know what could happen, it's the speed of how it's happening, right? And every time we wake up and do something, the system hits us with something else. That's really hard. It's really hard, to engage our communities that are completely under resources to go on the block and say, wait, let's do this rally against police violence. And they're like, yeah, I need to go to work. You know, I got to be at my shift. I'm the only person in my family. And a lot of people will often say people don't care, or they're apathetic. I say they completely care, and they're the ones keeping our communities alive. When George Floyd happened, nobody thought millions of people would be on the streets. But also, what people don't understand about George Floyd is when you see those protests, you're talking about younger, older, Black, Latino, Filipino, workers, rights, or like you saw it on the streets. And a lot of mainstream media will say, there's some people protesting. No. Millions of people protested. Whatever happened after that with the organizations, that's one thing. But often, and this is what happened to me, you do not become politicized until something happens. So the beginning of our conversation, that moment that led me to say, oh, this is wrong, no matter the protections that my parents created for me, and I'm very afraid for our children. I'm very afraid for our children who don't see or don't understand, or I'm sorry, who are not impacted by what's happening with this climate catastrophe. But I also think they're like, yo, y'all effed up the previous generation. Now, I don't think I did that, but maybe I did. So for me, my future work will be to uplift particularly younger people, to make sure if I'm on the ground, I am talking and asking the questions that mainstream media will not ask. And then I always am connected to younger people. So even with Ferguson and so many of the spaces around Puerto Rico and the greatest mass movements that Puerto Rico has ever seen, it's like, I open up my heart and I'm like, yo, let's do this. What do you need? You need money? I can't be on the streets with you right now, but I got you. What do you need? And I think that's what gives me the most hope, is that with every generation, they have the information. The flip side of all of this is also like, we just need to be prepared in our communities and what that looks like. And after covering like disasters in Ferguson and Puerto Rico, for me and my family, I'm just like, yo, let's get it together. What's the numbers? What does first aid pack look? What happens? Because I think we're there. And I mean, y'all in Cali, right? Like, whether you're being impacted by the weather at this moment, we see what's going on in the state. Like, this is the death sentence. What do we do to stop it? What do we do to protect the work that we're doing? Because I truly believe when somebody knows who they are, they're going to fight for the people. I believe in that.
Rosa Clemente, thank you so much. That was an incredible last word. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You don't bring me back.
Yes, indeed. And thank you,
love going in the
everyone,
library.
for joining us this evening. This has really been a special evening. We will remember this and remember this talk for quite some time.
Bring me back.
Yes, yes, we will bring you back, Rosa, because yeah,
Can I
you
say
have a
one thing
lot
too?
to say.
Can I say, you know, I'm sure so many people may be listening to Hard Knock Radio out of Pacifica, but tomorrow I'm going to do an interview with Davey D. And I hit him up just like, you know, usually we talk when something horrible happens. I told him, I said, I want to talk about like the lull, like what happens after we all get in the streets until we're not in the streets, you know, but it's Oakland, fam. Like I already know. Like if I didn't live in Albany, that would be my second home, you know. And I love the people. The people are amazing. Like, but I've also gotten so much support from folks out in the West, but particularly Oakland. Like what we see happening right now is been already set in stone. But we also have to understand, like, what does it mean for our future generations? And I love always being in space.
Well, all righty, Rosa. Thanks. Somebody say yes. I'm from Brooklyn and love Oakland because of the people. Go ahead, TB iPhone. I'm from Brooklyn too. Brownsville represent. Okay.
The Bronx, my husband's from Brooklyn, so and my daughter's born in Brooklyn, so I'm always repping Brooklyn.
All right. Everyone, have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Stay safe, everybody.